The worst case scenario is that Nova Scotia becomes an island.
The Bay of Fundy had the highest tides in the world, so if the dikes weren't there, Sackville, Amherst, they would flood twice a day.
Sea level rise and coastal flooding is on people's minds. We've lived through storms and we can see the tide, right up to the top of the dikes right now.
I've seen the impacts, I see the changes, I see what's occurring, and they are real.
It's hard not to feel that grief around the changing climate and the changing landscape as well. We have a responsibility to do the best we can to adapt to climate change. We're located next to the Bay of Fundy, where we experience some of the highest tides in the world. And it's also a really key transportation link between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. When the Acadians settled here in the 1600s, they built a series of dikes and abattoirs across the landscape, and that blocked out the salt water and allowed fresh water to drain off the system, so effectively making prime agricultural land.
The dikes that were built initially for agriculture, people started building behind because they were protected. The railroad along the Trans-Canada Highway from Sackville to Allac is built on the old Acadian dike and actually acts or serves as protection for the Trans-Canada Highway. We estimate there's $50 million a day worth of trade on the Trans-Canada Highway and the CN Rail. If a dike would breach or the railway would get washed out or the Trans-Canada Highway, if those lands were to flood, basically Nova Scotia would end up an island. That is our challenge right now against climate change. We see those tides reaching the top of our dikes.
It's inevitable that we're going to get higher sea levels. It's inevitable that we're going to get higher tides, more intense storms. So if we don't plan for that now, then that worst case scenario could happen.
We've been through floods, we've been through hurricanes, we're seeing them happening more often now, and so people have been impacted, whether it's folks with flooded basements or washed out roads or, being stuck, not being able to get to town, winter storms, ice storms, all through the year, people have been impacted. They're seeing it and feeling it and experiencing it, so you can't deny it out here.
It is a concern that if you would have a storm during a peak high tide, it could be quite disastrous for sure. When these dikes were built, there was always, foreshore, salt marsh, protecting and acting as a buffer, alleviating the extreme impact of the tide and storm events.
Over half of the salt marsh in Nova Scotia and over 80% of the salt marsh in this area has been lost to agriculture and other forms of development. One of the most important values of salt marshes and all wetlands is that they act as a sponge on the landscape. As we see increased sea level rise, they're able to absorb that extra wave action and that extra tidal action and extra ocean as it rises basically on our landscape. We restored our first salt marsh in this area 10 years ago, here in Olac. And we've continued to do that work in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island since then. If we restore as much as we can of the coast to that natural salt marsh state, we've seen that it does work. And we have an enormous amount of wetland expertise, but I think most importantly, we recognize that we can't do it alone and we're not doing it alone.
Climate change and adaptation is such a big, complex topic that one group like EOS or one community like Sackville, we can't do it all alone, or you can't do it individually. We've got a wide variety of people involved in the collaborative, everybody from researchers to planners, GIS technicians, other NGOs, so there's EOS, there's Ducks Unlimited, there's Nature New Brunswick, all levels of government. That big group created an action plan, a regional adaptation plan for our area. We want to learn about the latest research, like what Claude is doing and what different, groups are doing and stuff. And so we all have the same understanding of it so we can move ahead. There's definitely lots of focus and concern on environmental issues in our region.
We still have a lot of questions. How do we protect the rail? How do we protect the highway? Whatever solution we have or we come up with engineering-wise, if you have the possibility to incorporate salt marsh as a buffer to infrastructure, it's a great approach.
We should just let nature and let wetlands do their job in protecting us and our coastlines from sea level rise. We know what the answer is, so let's get out there and do it.